Hello everyone, welcome to From the Star Wars Home Video Library. I'm your host Nathan P. Butler, author of a saga on home video, and this is a bit of an odd episode. We are looking at Star Wars home video items this time, or at least home video items this time. Unlike last time, which was that weird episode where we took a look at some THX Remastered Edition inspired covers for reissues of novelizations and comic adaptations. I know that was kind of a weird one, not necessarily for everyone's tastes. This is an odd one though, because what we're looking at here is a pair of home video releases for a movie. And it is closely related, I guess you'd say, to Star Wars, such that because of the nature of the film, just like the nature of some like documentaries, for example, it will probably wind up being in a lot of Star Wars fans' home video collections or into the collections of a lot of Star Wars home video collectors as a Star Wars item or Star Wars adjacent, Star Wars related item. But it is definitely an oddball in terms of what it is, how it came to be, and just the release of it itself. But it's something that as soon as it was announced as available for pre-order, a lot of folks in the Star Wars home video community jumped on it. So it is obviously something that is sort of within this sphere. I consider it part of my Star Wars home video library. But again, it is odd. It's sort of an offshooty kind of thing. But it's not a parody like Spaceballs would be. So I don't know. It's kind of an oddball. We're going to take a look here at the film 5/25/77. So what even is this film? So it is a quasi-semi-autobiographical film by Patrick Reed Johnson. It is a film by Patrick Reed Johnson and Gary Kurtz, a name more familiar to Star Wars fans. And basically, it's the story of how Patrick Reed Johnson, as a young man, was into filmmaking, doing a lot of stuff on his own, how he essentially got his break of being able to visit Hollywood, and the impact of seeing an early cut of A New Hope, what was then just called Star Wars, because we're talking about 1966 going into 1977 when most of this stuff is happening. And the impact that it had on him, and how he tried to share that impact, I guess, and how this is sort of like all part of the background that eventually led him into being a filmmaker himself, doing things like Spaced Invaders, writing, I believe, Dragonheart, if you remember that particular film, but just kind of what drove him into that. And the story behind the film, not the story that's told in the film that is sort of behind the person, that is mostly true, but take some liberties and whatnot. The story behind the making of the actual film 5/25/77 is almost more interesting than the film itself, because basically he started working on this project back around 1999. It is 2022 right now. Just came out on home video. He started working on it basically in 1999 and started going around looking for funding for it around 2001. Didn't actually start filming stuff for it until 2004. The filming wrapped up in 2006 or so, and they wound up showing sort of a rough cut of it, a preview cut, in 2007 at Star Wars Celebration 4. At which point it gains kind of like this cult following for this project, because Star Wars fans have now seen it. They haven't seen a finished version, ironically very much like Patrick Reed Johnson had seen an early cut of A New Hope well before release, while they were still doing special effects and stuff like that during a visit that included speaking with John Dykstra. In essence, that same experience is being given to those people at Celebration to see this preview cut of 5/25/77. It wins the Heineken Red Star Award at the Hamptons International Film Festival the next year in 2008. But there's still a lot of work to be done on this thing. So eventually in 2012, he goes on like this sort of tour to go around trying very hard to get funding to finish post-production on it. And in the process, he winds up being the subject of a documentary, which I have not seen, called Hearts of Dorkness. Until finally, another sort of preview cut, rough cut, work in progress, whatever you want to call it, kind of cut, was shown at the Toronto International Film Festival in 2013. So the project kind of continuously being kept alive through trying to look for funding and showing up at these strategic film festivals and Star Wars Celebration, to keep people interested in the work. some last effects and other shots to get taken care of around 2015, 2016, and it finally has a very limited theatrical premiere on May 22nd of 2017. So we're talking like from the era when Phantom Menace was about to hit theaters, or around the time Phantom Menace was hitting theaters, when this is the brainchild here, up to the midst of the Disney era by the time it actually is finished and shown. It's a very limited run, though, actually starting at one of the locations, I believe, that's actually in the story as far as local theaters go, because it is a big factor in the story, that actual theater is. So they intend on actually putting it out in theaters and to stream and so forth in 2021. That doesn't happen. It gets pushed back into 2022. In September of 2022, the final version of it debuts at the Skyline Indie Film Fest in Virginia. That is then followed shortly thereafter, like a week or so later, by actually showing up in some theaters, though, again, certainly not many, until finally hitting the release where most people are going to be able to actually see it, which is on home video, November 22nd of this year, just recently here during this previous Thanksgiving break that just ended, where it premiered thanks to MVD on Blu-ray and on DVD. I mean, it's digital also, but when it comes to the actual physical media releases, there are no included digital copies or anything like that. So we're talking physical releases in this episode. So in a lot of ways, kind of like Lucas, taking a long time to get the idea to eventually be on screen, only in this case taking even longer. The question here is, what is this? It's called 52577, right? It's a blatant reference there to the release date of A New Hope. But bear in mind what I mentioned a moment ago about sort of the general concept behind this story. This is not a Star Wars story per se. It is a real-world story. It is not some story with a lot of fantastical changes and crazy twists and turns of events that only fiction could bring, because it's not fully fiction. It is, at least to an extent, based on life experiences of Patrick Reed Johnson, who is a real person going through this stuff. And in that sense, it's an oddity, in that it is going to heavily appeal, primarily, I would say, to the Star Wars fandom. Probably has somewhat limited appeal generally just as a coming-of-age story, but mostly it's going to appeal to the Star Wars fandom. But I don't think so much it's appealing to the Star Wars fandom because of Star Wars content, per se. I think it has a similar appeal to behind-the-scenes stuff for Star Wars. I guess, and it's not really an apt comparison, but I think to me, what it resonates with is the idea of something I've gotten into watching more recently, which is theater reactions to films, right? Where somebody has snuck a camera in or snuck an audio recorder in and has captured the reactions of people in the movie theater freaking out at the stuff they're seeing on scene, and just the magic of capturing that experience for posterity. Or reaction videos when done right. I am someone who, for a long time, not a fan of a lot of reactors online, just like for unboxers online, because I think there are limitations to that format. Unboxings, know what you're talking about. Don't just open them up and pull out stuff and just say, oh, look, here's this. Well, what is it? What does it mean? What is it in context? Especially if you're talking about unboxing something that's like a game or something. Same thing with reactions. A lot of time people who do reactions are extremely overblown, and you wonder if the reactions could possibly be their genuine reactions to stuff. Not every single instance of something happening in a TV show is not everything necessitates a let's go kind of moment. But I have found, there are some reactors I really enjoy watching their stuff now, like Previewed, Heroes Reforged, Blind Wave, Kyle Katarn, especially when it comes to the Star Wars stuff. I'm someone who's getting more into that because there is something to be said for not just the viewing experience, but the communal experience that goes with it, and seeing and sharing the reactions of others, even if what you are sharing is the reaction of others asynchronously, where you're not watching it with them. You're not even watching it at the same time, separately. But you're seeing their reactions, and you remember how you felt seeing the same thing, and that sort of draws in that emotional connection. It's the community vibe, I guess you could say, of something like that. I think that's where 52577 is going to grab people. Not because of the Star Wars content. Star Wars is like a plot point device to get from point A to point B. But the effect that it has, and just the characters in general and their story, will probably resonate a lot with people of, particularly who are Star Wars fans, but particularly kind of that generation, or slightly thereafter, perhaps. It is definitely a story that feels like it is a coming of age for young adults, for like people in their teens, because there's some stupid shit that they do. And there's some personal interactions that you're like, God, that was so dumb. But that's kind of how a lot of times you see immature reactions play off of each other. It is also somewhat of a product of its time. It captures the time, even in ways that will probably be abrasive to some. For example, when the main character is trying to get in touch with one of his sort of Hollywood heroes to try to be a doorway into Hollywood, there's a lot of, oh, you're calling him up? Are you gay? Kind of jokes that would be considered specifically off-color, particularly in 2022, but maybe weren't considered as off-color in the years in which it was actually being filmed, and certainly not quite as off-color in 76, 77. It was a different world in terms of what were considered sensibilities within society on issues like that. So in that sense, it's a weird sort of time capsule type film. It is filmed very creatively, I will say. In terms of the choice of uses of things like the lenses, the level of graininess or not to different scenes, the aspect ratio changing depending on the scene that you're seeing, and what it sort of represents in the life of the individual, the way that it's sort of told to a degree as the person sort of piecing a film of their own life together, trying to excise certain parts, and the editing process that goes with that if you were making a film of your own life. And even like things like, the guy did a lot of models and stuff for his own films at home. Certain scenes in which, all of a sudden there are models as opposed to cars. Like here's a parking lot. It's actually a model parking lot, not just a shot of the parking lot. It's a very creatively done thing. I don't know if it will be for all Star Wars fans. I don't know if this is something that I can truly recommend to all viewers, because it is just not, it is, like I said, it's Star Wars adjacent. If you want a coming-of-age, semi-autobiographical story to which many, at least of a generation who grew up in the 70s or 80s, could probably at least somewhat relate to, and you care about and find interest in the personal impact, not the societal impact, but the personal impact of something like Star Wars hitting theaters. We talk a lot about how it changed movie making forever, but thinking about the way that it impacts individuals, that I think you're going to dig. But it is a very different type of film than what most Star Wars fans will have in their collection among documentaries, spoofs, and actual official releases. It's just not really any of those. So just be aware of what it is before you just say, oh, Star Wars, 52577, that's the date A New Hope came out, must grab. Because it's an oddity. It definitely is an oddity. I'm glad that I saw it. I was not looking forward to watching it at all. I felt like it was going to be a chore to watch it after watching the trailers. And I really enjoyed it. How many times will I watch it again? I don't know. But that's any movie at this point, really. Unless it really, really captures me. But I did enjoy the film. And I did, by the end of it, feel like this is a story that it transcended what the trailers suggested it was going to be. But it was also much less Star Wars focused than otherwise. Before we look at the items, I know this is a long opening and review type thing. It's a different sort of feel for this type of episode of the show. But it's kind of like, to a degree, I would say, like if somebody did a life story on me, I would hope that as they talk about things like me getting into teaching full-time online, that maybe it would come up with how I got the job in part because of what I was already doing with online resources, asynchronous instruction, providing study resources that I produced like podcasts and whatnot to my students in a brick and mortar classroom, that in and of itself was to some degree informed by my years doing Star Wars podcasting, which in and of itself was informed not just by that, but getting into it because of the Star Wars Timeline Gold and all of that. That Star Wars would be a piece of the story and the impetus for certain things, and somewhat of the context, perhaps, of some aspects of my life story, how I met and things that I share with my wife and so on, that sort of thing. And, my childhood and perhaps the ideas of right and wrong being formed in part by light side, dark side thinking. But I would hope that in my life, Star Wars would not be the only thing as the through line of telling the story of my individual life. Star Wars was a big part of it, a very influential part of it, and helped spur certain things. It was the impetus in a lot of ways for certain bits and pieces. But a fan is more than their fandom, and certainly more than just their love of the franchise. It's what they've done with it, it's how it's influenced them, and it's a life hopefully well lived outside even the context of the fiction. And I think that is what this does. It's Star Wars as a context. It is Star Wars as a jumping off point, as a motivating factor in some cases, but it is not the through line. The through line is the man's life. Star Wars is simply a major piece of shaping that life from a certain point onward in terms of drastically influencing certain choices at a pivotal point in his life, if that makes sense. Anyway, let's look at the products here. This is the official DVD release here of 5/25/77. So what we have here is a somewhat Star Wars-esque bit of cover art here, with different aspects of the film, different characters in the film. I'm not going to go into detail with all of them. Yes, the monolith plays a big role. In fact, I would almost say that the monolith here probably may have made a name, Monolith, just as appropriate as 5/25/77 to a degree. Because so much of it is before he ever sees anything Star Wars related and how it relates to like driving his film desire and the metaphors that go with the monolith and all that. But whatever. So we have the title, 5/25/77. There's no zero, so it is 5, not 05. 25/77. It did go through different names. At one point it was going to be called 77, then it went back. And it says the tagline, the true story of a boy, a girl, and not a galaxy, as was the case for A New Hope. The movie that changed everything. So true story, not just story, and boy, girl, and the last part, of course, there is different, but it's playing off of the early Star Wars tagline there. Okay. The spine, here we've got 5/25/77, nothing at the top and down at the bottom, DVD symbol, MVD visual, and the product number. The back, few shots from it. I will read that, but I'll read that off the Blu-ray version. It does note the special features. We'll come to those here in just a moment. And your other options here, for what it's worth, it is widescreen, but again, aspect ratios do change. Color, 132 minutes. English subtitles available, 5.1 surround. Then you've got your cast crew, which is pretty huge, primarily from like a lot of people who help with funding and stuff like that. Your various logos and whatnot, and legalese, warnings and everything. MVD visual, copy protection, not rated. All regions, so this is not region locked. It is NTSC, however. FBI warning thing, Dolby Audio, DVD symbol down there. Barcode, of course, up at the top. There is a little film.io advertisement thing inside. DVD case sized. And then there's your disc, which is essentially laid out with just the poster art there, legalese going around the edge, title, MVD visual, product number, and then DVD is all right there. Okay, so if you put that in, for what it's worth, you don't have a lot of options. There is only one trailer on it as an extra, and the trailer that is on there is the one that is referred to on the Blu-ray bonus features as the real-life trailer, having to do with a quote. The trailers, there's like 3 trailers that you see if you look at the Blu-ray, and they're all pretty much the same trailer. It's just that the opening moments of the trailer are different depending on which trailer it is, and that's what gives them the 3 different names. And then you have the Blu-ray release. This one actually has a slipcover on it. The DVD does not. So the slipcover there is essentially just a DVD dimension version of what we saw there with the DVD artwork, same tagline, title, and whatnot here. The spine is just going to be the title, format symbol, in this case Blu-ray, MVD visual, and product number again. A similarly designed back for the slipcover here, the information about it, UPC and the images, special features, but there's more of them. Stats we'll look at in just a second. and then all your legalese and everything down here. This is also, for what it's worth, it is all region, right? Region free. It is a Blu-ray though, so NTSC PAL doesn't matter, so you should be able to play it on your player. In most cases, it doesn't matter. Again, widescreen color, 132 minutes, subtitles still only English, audio still 5.1 surround. Before we look at special features, what does it say as a description here? Maybe describing it better than I could. During the spring of 1977, sci-fi obsessed teenager Pat Johnson, John Francis Daly, game night, finds himself torn between making 8mm sequels to his favorite movies and pursuing the girl of his dreams, Linda, Emmy Chin, normal. Desperate to help her son escape his likely future in Wadsworth, Illinois, population 750, his mother Janet, Colleen Camp, Wayne's World, cold calls the editor of American Cinematographer magazine, and Pat soon finds himself on the ultimate trip to Hollywood, becoming the very first outsider to see the film that would change him and movies forever, Star Wars. But when Pat returns to his hometown existence, he struggles to choose between chasing a seemingly impossible dream and accepting the comforting familiarity of home. That does encapsulate very well, and may I say the mom in this, based on the real mother, great mom, I will say. Very encouraging in many respects, and hilarious. There's a moment in which she breaks into song. I will not say what the song is, but it's when it switches tones based on a question that he asks. It is hilarious to me. There were a lot of moments in this that, again, like I said, I watched the trailer. I didn't expect to get much out of it. I thought it'd be like, maybe a bit of a chore to watch it because it just didn't really grab me from the trailer. But there were some moments I was just literally laughing out loud. Not huge guffaws, but laughing out loud, which again was surprising to me. In any event, so special features we'll look at in a second. Let's take off the slipcover. The interior Blu-ray case here, effectively set up the same way. No big shocks or surprises there. Again, a Blu-ray size version of the Film.io advertisement-y thing. And a similarly designed Blu-ray label that's essentially the same as a DVD label. It just has the Blu-ray on there. I would note, by the way, the labels don't tell you region on these, but again, as I said, it is region-free for both, but NTSC PAL will matter, of course, for the DVD. So you pop this in, you've got your normal options, play, chapters, and setup, but then there's an extras menu and a trailers menu. The trailers menu has basically 6 trailers in it, 3 of which are for 5/25/77, 3 of which are not. The ones that are not are for Zeroville, The Go-Go Boys, and Delirious. Yes, I've written this down in some really horribly chicken scratch notes here, or whatever Star Wars-y chickens would be. I will also say that it has, again, the 3 trailers. Again, they're very similar except for the openings. The trailers are Real Life, Star Wars, and Insert Tank are the names of the 3 different trailers. But they're all essentially very similarly designed as far as the trailers themselves go. As far as extras go, you get a Q&A from the 2013 Fantasia Film Festival with Patrick Reed Johnson, the main character slash real-life guy behind the film. And then you have some photo galleries. There are 3 of those, cast, crew, stuff like that. The miniatures get their own, for example. There's also an audio commentary on the Blu-ray. It's an audio commentary with Patrick Reed Johnson, moderated by Seth Gavin, who is a founder of AV Squad and editor of the film Spaced Invaders. So as usual, Blu-ray, better quality overall from a visual standpoint, from actually watching the film standpoint, but also more options in terms of extras and in terms of having, in this case, an audio commentary that the DVD does not have. Definitely Blu-ray is the way to go. It's also the fancier product with an actual slipcover on the thing. I would note, by the way, that Q&A is actually about an hour long. It's a really pretty substantial Q&A. Pretty cool. I will say I watched it on the Blu-ray, and there are some issues with the subtitles at times, so just be aware of that if you're someone who follows the subtitles like I do when watching pretty much anything. So yeah, it's kind of a different type of production. I don't know how many people in the audience of this show are really going to get a lot out of watching it. I enjoyed it when I didn't think I was going to. But then again, I am someone who, one of my favorite fan-made films from back in the day was The Formula by a friend of mine, Chris Hannell. It was Chris Hannell, Steve Phelan, Abe Paterka, Becca Paterka, Justin Whitlock. They made a film that's basically a group of friends and the struggles of trying to make a fan film and sort of what all of this meant and how Star Wars kind of played into what it meant for them. I think this is more abstract from a Star Wars standpoint than that, but if you remember The Formula and enjoyed The Formula, this is probably a type of film that you would enjoy if you're from sort of my generation of being interested in Star Wars fan films back in the day. So yeah, an interesting film. Not necessarily going to be for everybody, but if you want to see it, you now can, for wide audiences finally, on home video, on DVD or Blu-ray. It is $525.77, released just recently in November 2022. I'm glad that it is now part of my Star Wars home video library, so maybe others will be as well. Hence, wanting to share that with you. But it being such an odd thing, I did want to make sure to give you more information than I typically would about the content of something as a production, so that you can at least make a decision on buying it, not just based on the physical product existing and maybe wanting it in a Star Wars home video library, but based hopefully on whether you think it's the actual type of production that would appeal to someone of your individual tastes. With that, we'll wrap up this episode. Thank you for watching, and may the Force be with the home video viewers.